Stop for a second and notice that you are thinking. That thought you just had, right now, is a real physical event happening inside your head. And here is the strange part. That thought is not gliding along one smooth, continuous wire. It is leaping across gaps. Right now, as you follow these words, signals inside your skull are jumping over millions of microscopic gaps, tiny empty spaces between separate cells, each one catching the message, passing it on, and letting go. Your brain is not one connected mesh of wiring. It is a vast crowd of separate cells, billions of them, each its own tiny island, whispering to its neighbors across spaces too small to see. Reach out and touch the nearest thing to you. That feeling did not race up your arm along a cable. It was handed along, cell to cell to cell, across gap after gap, the whole way to your brain. This is not a figure of speech. This is the actual architecture of you. And for almost all of human history, nobody knew it, until one stubborn outsider looked down a microscope and drew what no one else could see. His name was Santiago Ramón y Cajal, and almost nothing about him promised a giant of science. He grew up in a small town in the hills of Spain, far from the famous laboratories of Paris and Berlin, working late by a single lamp. As a boy, the only thing he truly wanted was to draw. He was rebellious, self-taught in the things he cared about, and easy to underestimate. And yet this is the man who first saw that your nervous system is built from separate cells, and who drew it so precisely, so beautifully, that his pictures still hang in art galleries and still teach students more than a century later. The story even carries a twist worthy of a novel. He would one day share the highest honor in science with the very rival whose method he borrowed, and on the night they were celebrated together, that rival would rise at the lectern and use the moment to argue, to Cajal's face, that he was wrong. Hold on to that. First, let me show you why any of this lives inside you. So look at the back of your hand, open and close it, slowly. That simple movement is an order, leaving your brain and traveling down your arm, but not in one smooth signal. It is a relay, passed from one cell to the next across gap after gap until it reaches the muscle and the fingers curl. Everything you experience works this way. The sound of my voice arriving in your ear right now is being handed inward, cell to cell. The light in this room reaching your eye becomes a chain of little signals hopping the gaps. A feeling rising in your chest, a word on the tip of your tongue, all of it is separate cells, passing messages one at a time across empty space. Press 2 fingers to the back of your neck. Underneath, a living forest of these cells is firing in patterns right now, just to keep you reading this sentence. Now here is the part that should genuinely stop you. If your brain is billions of separate cells, then who you are is not in any single one of them. It is in the pattern in which cells reach toward which, and how strongly across all those gaps. A memory is a path worn through that crowd. Learning something new, the way you did as a child, is that crowd of cells quietly rewiring which of them talk to which. Your whole inner life, every face you can picture, every song you know by heart, is written as a map of connections across separate cells. The literal architecture of your mind is a conversation between billions of tiny islands, and for thousands of years nobody understood the first thing about it. The map inside your head was the greatest unexplored country on Earth, until a boy who wanted to be a painter picked up a microscope. Santiago Ramón y Cajal was born in 1852, in a small town in the hills of Spain, the son of a strict country doctor. And from the start, father and son wanted different things. The boy wanted to be an artist. He filled every scrap of paper he could find with drawings, and he was, by every account, difficult, rebellious, dreamy, forever in trouble. His father, a practical man, wanted him in medicine, and pushed hard against the sketching. So the two of them struck an uneasy truce. The father, who taught anatomy, took the boy to draw the human body, bones first, thinking it would steer him into a proper career. What it actually did was fuse the two halves of him together. The boy learned to draw what he saw under the eye of a scientist, and to see with the eye of an artist. That combination was rarer than anyone realized. Now, Cajal did become a doctor, but he was never quite an insider. He worked in Spain, off to one side of the great scientific capitals, with modest equipment and little of the fame or funding that flowed through Paris and Berlin. His laboratory, for years, was essentially a room in his own home, but he had two things almost no one else had at once. He had the patience to sit at a microscope night after night, alone, staring at slivers of brain tissue thinner than a whisper, and he had the trained eye and hand of an artist to draw exactly what he saw there, no more and no less. Most scientists of his day looked at the maddening tangle of the brain and drew a vague impression of it. Cajal looked at the same tangle and rendered it with the honesty of a portrait painter, and that honesty was about to overturn the single biggest idea in the science of the mind. To understand what Cajal was up against, you have to know what nearly every expert of the 1800s believed. They thought the nervous system was one continuous fused web. Picture the wiring behind a wall, all soldered together into a single unbroken net. That was the reigning idea, the reticular theory, and it made a kind of sense. When you look at brain tissue, it really does seem like a hopeless tangle. Everything running into everything else, with no clear edges. The greatest anatomists in the world had signed on. The textbooks taught it, the authorities defended it, and to argue otherwise was to argue with the entire establishment. If the brain was one fused net, then a signal could spread anywhere, like water through a soaked sponge, and you, your thoughts, yourself, would be smeared across a single continuous thing. It was a reasonable guess, and it was wrong. The trouble was, no one could prove it either way, because no one could get a clear look at a single cell in all that tangle. Then came the tool that changed everything, and here is the beautiful, complicated part of this story. It was invented by a brilliant Italian scientist named Camillo Golgi. Golgi had discovered a staining method, a chemistry that did something almost magical. Drop a piece of brain tissue into it, and for reasons still not fully understood, it stains only a random few of the cells, but the ones it catches, it blackens completely every last branch, standing stark and dark against a clear background. Instead of an impossible tangle, you suddenly see a handful of whole cells, alone and legible. Now hold on to the irony. Golgi believed firmly in the one fused web. His stain was the very thing that would be used to destroy his theory, and the man who would use it was Cajal, who got hold of the method, improved it, worked it on young tissue where the cells sit less crowded, and then put his artist's eye to the microscope. What he saw there, no one had ever drawn before. Here is what Cajal saw, and why it changed everything. The cells were not fused. Where the web theory said one branch should melt seamlessly into the next, Cajal followed the branches to their very tips and found that they stopped. Each cell reached toward its neighbor, came achingly close, and then left a tiny gap. They were in contact, but not continuous, touching but separate. Think of two people reaching out until their fingertips almost meet, a hair of space still between them. That gap is real, and decades later it would get a name you may have heard, the synapse. Every one of these cells, Cajal showed, was its own independent unit, its own little body, its own reaching branches, and your brain was built from billions of them, each a separate thing, all whispering across those gaps. This is the idea we now call the neuron doctrine, and it turned the fused web inside out. And Cajal saw something even finer. The signals didn't slosh around at random. They ran in one direction. A message comes in through the cell's spreading branches. The dendrites passes through the body and races out along a single long fiber, the axon, to the very next cell in line. In one side, out the other. Always the same way. He drew this traffic of thought with little arrows, mapping the flow through the crowd like a city planner tracing its one-way streets. And because he was an artist, his evidence didn't just convince, it was beautiful. Page after page of these delicate branching cells, inked with a precision that no photograph of the day could match. He called them, tenderly, the butterflies of the soul. Cajal, quietly, had done it. He had shown the world the true wiring of the mind. Separate cells, tiny gaps, one-way flow. All that remained was to convince a field that had believed the opposite for 100 years. For a long time, the outsider from Spain was doubted, argued with, and made to fight for every inch. But the drawings were simply too clear, and slowly, the greatest minds in the field came around. And in 1906, it happened. Santiago Ramón y Cajal was awarded the Nobel Prize, the highest honor in all of science for revealing the structure of the nervous system. He had come from a small Spanish town, working by lamplight in a room in his house, and now the world was calling him one of its greatest scientists. I want to be clear about this, because it matters. This is not a story of a man robbed. He won. He was celebrated. But the prize came with an extraordinary twist. Cajal did not receive it alone. He shared it with none other than Camillo Golgi, the inventor of the very stain he had used, and the most powerful champion of the fused web theory that Cajal's own work had just overturned. Two men, one stage, honored together for opposite conclusions about the same thing. And then came the moment that historians still talk about. At the ceremony, each winner gives a lecture. Golgi stood up first, at the height of his honor, in front of the whole scientific world, and he used his Nobel lecture to defend the old fused web. He argued forcefully against the very neuron doctrine that the prize beside him was honoring. Picture it. Cajal sits in the audience, having traveled from Spain to be celebrated for proving the brain is made of separate cells, and listens to the man sharing his prize argue to that very room that he is wrong. Now, it would be easy to make Golgi the villain here, and it would be false. Golgi was a brilliant scientist who genuinely, sincerely believed the web was real. This was not spite, it was conviction. Two honest people looking at the same tissue, seeing two different truths. History would side with the outsider, but that night, with quiet dignity, Cajal simply gave his own lecture and let the drawings speak. Cajal was right. Not completely, not about everything. He built on the work of others, and the word neuron itself was coined by another scientist. But the core of it, the great vision, was his. The brain is built of separate cells, signaling across gaps, one direction at a time, and that idea is the foundation the entire science of the mind now stands on. We call him, fairly, the father of modern neuroscience. And here is the part one love most. The drawings he made, peering down that microscope by lamplight, were so precise and so beautiful that scientists still use them to teach. They are printed in textbooks to this day, and they hang framed in galleries as works of art. The teenage dream his father tried to talk him out of is basically why we can picture a neuron at all. So go back to where we started. That thought you're having right now, reading this, it is leaping across a million tiny gaps, cell to separate cell. In a living forest, a boy from small-town Spain was the first to see. Touch something near you one more time. That too is his butterflies of the soul, carrying the message home. If the way your own mind is built stayed with you, do me a small favor. Like this video, subscribe to follow the rest of these, and tell me in the comments whose forgotten story I should draw next. There are so many of them still waiting for someone to finally see them clearly.